What's going on, everyone? My name's Tenebris Infinite, and today I'm bringing you dudes a video on what's possibly one of the most ultimate loadouts here in Generation Zero. This is going to be the first of probably a couple videos where I give you dudes a full loadout, 8 guns to work with. That way you can have some variety in your gameplay and maybe pull away from some of the metas of the experimental weapons. We are going to be utilizing experimental ammunition for these weapons, but it absolutely is not a must. If you're early on in the game and you're working with like maybe, 3 crown or 4 crown weapons, you can totally use this loadout with just your typical FMJ and armor piercing ammunition varieties. For this loadout, we are using the N16 assault rifle, the 50 cal and just its 5 crown variety, the G79 grenade launcher, the 12 gauge pump action shotgun, the COM-10 SMG, the N9 handgun, the S21 battle rifle, as well as the 44 Magnus. The idea of this loadout is to be incredibly well-rounded and offer you a ton of variety in your gameplay. In the future, we might do loadouts that include certain equipment items, but for now, I want to be giving you dudes full 5 crown type loadouts so that you can run around like a proper Doom guy here in Generation Zero. So we'll take a little bit of a moment here to talk about how this loadout works, but really I want you dudes to try out this loadout and get to experience it for yourself instead of having me explain every single detail. So instead, we're going to take a little bit of an opportunity to talk about some of the American lore that's been added to the game and some potentials that we could see in the future in regards to our American friends. This loadout covers all ranges, from close to medium to far range enemies. The S21 serves as an absolute powerhouse of a sniper rifle, utilizing the 7.62 shock ammo to get that damage output that you really need from a long distance sniper rifle like this. Then alongside that, you have the G79 filling in all of that utility purpose of the EMP rounds, the smoke rounds, and the high explosive. And then you have the PVG with explosive rounds loaded into it to serve as, again, a long-distance, high-damage dealing weapon. The shotgun serves as another utility weapon, so you have 2 utility weapons in your loadout. As it's just the 5 crown version of the 12 gauge shotgun, it doesn't have the healing abilities of the experimental, instead offering the ability to serve as both a close, long, and medium ranged weapon with its ammunition varieties, using the slugs with a scope at long distances, and then taking that scope off for the bird and buckshot at close and medium distances. With your loadout, you'll want to synergize all your weapons to kind of work together. So all of the weapons that can support a suppressor, you'll want to have a suppressor on kind of all of them at the same time so that they all serve that purpose of stealth. Then, if you're planning on going loud, you take off the suppressor and slap on a compensator to the COM-10, or a barrel extension. I always forget about those. As well, you could get a barrel extension onto the N16, and you'll take suppressors off of your handguns and put a compensator onto your Magnus. Every single weapon in this loadout works as a stealth weapon, excluding the 50 cal. Moving on from the COM-10, which you'll want to load up with either FMJ, AP, or explosive rounds, and probably just skip out on the corrosive rounds. But moving on from that, with the N9, you'll want to load that up with shock rounds so that you can use it in tandem with the S21 in order to get just some real nasty shock damage off. Then following that is the S21, which of course you'll be using with that shock ammo. And then lastly is the 44 Magnus, and for this you're going to use it as a bit of a stealth sniper. It's going to essentially be your long-ranged suppressed weapon. Now for this, you can put a scope onto your Magnus if you're absolutely a horrible human being and lack any sort of human empathy. No, I'm kidding. I just really don't like scopes on handguns. But I do think that with this loadout, putting the scope on the Magnus would actually be a pretty proper thing to do. I'll just never do it myself. A lot of people feel very locked into the experimental PvG, but the only real thing that the experimental PvG offers over the typical PvG, other than a little bit of increased damage, is that piercing ability. And even though that piercing ability is super addictive to use, you can still use the base 5 crown PvG to do some serious damage. Just to kind of show that this loadout is actually fully top meta, you could take this over to Himfell Island on even all the way up to monkey mode and have some excellent moments of combat, just because you're packing so much power in between all of your weapons, especially once you start loading them up with experimental ammunition types. I guess those couple extra explosions gave this hunter freaking god loot. What the heck? So normally, it's kind of hard for me to work in giant full fights into my videos because I make kind of fast-paced content, and sometimes the massive fights of Generation Zero just don't serve to fit that super perfectly. But with this loadout, I wanted to let just a big fight play out, so you guys could kind of just see this loadout in action, instead of me telling you the ins and outs of like every single weapon, because I'm sure a lot of it is a given. Now, the lore about the Americans and NATO in general here in Generation Zero is far and few between. They've been very hands-off with the entire cataclysm of Ostertorn and the invasion of the Swedish machines, and the Soviet ones now too. But we got our first major interaction and lore dump about NATO with our first weapons pack. Since the fateful day of the cataclysm, NATO and the USSR have been closely monitoring the situation in Sweden, raising their preparedness levels and weighing options. When proof was obtained that there were survivors hiding in multiple locations in Ostertorn, Resolution Reaction Phase 1 was passed at NATO. As an urgent temporary solution, large quantities of standard-issue weapons used in the American military were to be dropped all over Ostertorn in order to offer immediate assistance and support to the various groups of survivors. Now, Reaction Phase 1 happened during Phoenix Rising, which was around the beginning of January 1990, so actually not too long ago in terms of how far we've come along here in Generation Zero, just by a few months. After that, we have the entire events of the Matryoshka reports that happened off in the distance and away from our character while we were doing our own thing after Phoenix Rising. Essentially, throughout this, Tatiana and her group of Soviets came over to Ostertorn, had a bunch of shit go wrong, dropped a bunker buster right down in the middle of the farmlands, and then everything kind of went awry after that. Now, during all of that, there is a side mention that Tatiana is nervous that maybe the Americans had noticed the bunker buster being dropped. And I think that this is a very high potential, and might even be the method of the Americans being brought around into Generation Zero's plot proper here. Now, shortly after that in Generation Zero's timeline, in either late February or early March, we saw US Weapons Pack 2 come to the game. And with this, we got another additional little dump of lore to go along with it. Even though this lore dump was a bit shorter than our last one, we still have a number of lines that we can tie here. So the lore reads, while the survivors of Ostertorn have already managed to scavenge some US and Soviet weapons, NATO has decided it's time to broaden the arsenal even further, dropping another shipment of American weapons across the resistance-controlled territories. While this is still not enough to stave off the machine invasion, it should help the fighters tackle most situations and battles. So what we can conclude here is that the second drop of NATO weapons and American weapons here in Ostertorn is not Phase 2, or even the beginning of Phase 2, but just yet another step of Phase 1. At this point, it's hard to say what other reaction phases will look like here in Generation Zero, but it's safe to say that potentially our further reaction phases will not take the form of weapons packs, but maybe a much more real thing that we'll see here in the game. The Soviets were able to make their own machines and enterprise on technology within the span of a year. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that the Americans and NATO have been doing at least something along a similar line. In our latest dev stream, we actually got a bit of a spicy hint towards the future of the machines here and what we'll be seeing. So I'll let that play out and then we'll talk about it for a second here.
Use a Soviet machine would be interesting, or we could branch out into other
to see,
other areas.
See what's out there, what people are after, all of that.
Maybe Phoenix constructed a new machine to counter the Soviet machines.
That's actually a really good thing. That would be hilarious. Maybe not, but it would be very interesting. That's a really good thing. I'd like to see that.
So I think based on this, more than likely, the next machine we're going to be seeing here in Generation Zero is not going to be an American machine or a Soviet machine, but we'll be seeing something new from Phoenix in order to counter his brand new threat here. Definitely might be reading into things, so take that all with a grain of salt and we'll just see how things play out here, but I think that this might have just been a very, very spicy hint. And from this hint, I think it's pretty safe to say that for NATO and the Americans, Reaction Phase 2 will not be them showing up with machines, but potentially showing up with maybe something else. They might try to set up their infrastructure with their human units first in comparison to the Soviets that kind of brought everything all on over with them all at once. It's really hard to say when Reaction Phase 2 is going to happen, though. The real question is are we going to see Phase 1 potentially have a third portion to its phase, a third drop of weapons? Or are we potentially going to see the Americans start to really gear up now that that bunker buster has been dropped in the farmlands? I think we're going to have to keep our eyes very, very close on whatever the next upcoming DLC is to see if there's any hints towards the Americans or anything that potentially could have further fallout, like large-scale actions that have a serious impact on the map. There is the question of what's going to be coming next to Generation Zero as a weapon pack, though. And shoutouts to Pro Captain AJ over on the forums for making the kind of assumption here, because I think it's a very sound theory. And so the idea is that the first US weapon pack had an LMG, an assault rifle, and a pistol. The Soviet weapon pack had a heavy weapon, an SMG, and a sniper rifle, and then the second US weapon pack had a heavy weapon, a SMG, and a sniper rifle. So if the pattern does follow through, then potentially the second Soviet weapons pack will have an LMG, an assault rifle, and a pistol in it. So let's go over the loadout again just one more time before we close off the video so that you guys can fully know every weapon here. The N16, the PVG-90, the G79, the 12G, the Com-10, the N9, the S21, and the 44 Magnus in that order. The idea of this loadout is to give you a simple one of each type approach, as well as rounding things off and thinking about the utility of certain weapons and the flow of other weapons. You can replace the S21 in this loadout for the N60 LMG if you'd like, for maintaining that American ethos as well as offering maybe a higher rate of fire 7.62 weapon, but personally for me, I kinda like the new guy with the S21. So, my dudes, at the end of the video here, I'm putting out a bit of a challenge to you guys, actually. I want to see what you can take down with this loadout. If you could send videos my way over on Twitter, my Twitter is linked down in the description below. I would love to see them. Or you can just tell me your accounts down in the comments below, if that is your preferred venue. But I really want to hear of some crazy stories with this loadout, because you can have some pretty awesome things. And I really think that a Reaper takedown with this loadout would be pretty dang easy. We might even test that out with next Tuesday's stream. Typical Tuesdays with Tenebris every Tuesday at 2. So make sure you tune in to maybe see a bit of a Reaper takedown live and in person. But for now, my dudes, thank you very much for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoy and are enjoying the new American weapons, and hopefully you enjoy this loadout as well. But cheers, my dudes, thank you very much for watching, stay awesome, and I will catch you all in the next one. Until then, peace.